US consumer prices increased marginally in July as headline CPI came in less than expected, though rising costs for some services and tariff-sensitive goods drove underlying inflation, that's core inflation, to inch up to its largest gain since January. The headline consumer price index increased 0.2% for the month and 2.7% on a 12-month basis, compared with the respective estimates for 0.2% and 2.8%. If we exclude food and energy, the core CPI increased 0.3% for the month and 3.1% from a year ago, compared with the forecasts for 0.3% and 3%. Hello, welcome to Global Business Insights, where we consider the headlines moving markets. In this episode, we look at some of the macroeconomic data, especially US inflation, and how things are shaping out with the Federal Reserve meeting taking place next month in terms of rate cuts. US stocks were higher, reaching new highs as investors were relieved with the latest tamer than expected inflation data, and traders also ramped up bets that the Federal Reserve would start reducing rates again in September. Wall Street will also consider tomorrow's producer price index report for a reading on wholesale inflation. Both reports are ahead of the Federal Reserve's Jackson Hole annual gathering of central bankers at the end of August, and also ahead of the central bank's September policy meeting. Although there was some impact from higher tariffs, this was more than offset by lower energy and food prices. Looking at the tariff-sensitive sectors, household furnishings and supplies showed a 0.7% increase after rising 1% in June, but apparel prices were up just 0.1% and core commodity prices increased just 0.2%. Canned fruits and vegetables, which generally are imported and also sensitive to tariffs, were also flat. According to James Bullard, the former president of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Board, who is one of those in the running to succeed Powell as chair, the July inflation data showed that the impact of tariffs was limited to very muted effects that were one-time increases in the price level. He added that he saw most of the rate-setting Federal Open Market Committee coming around to the view that Trump's trade war is not interrupting the longer-term trend towards the 2% inflation target. Still, White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said yesterday that the U.S. president is considering a lawsuit against Federal Reserve Chair Powell over management of renovations at the Fed's Washington headquarters, escalating continuing pressure on the central bank leader to either cut interest rates or exit. Still on data, this time in the UK, the Office for National Statistics reported that the economy created fresh 239,000 jobs in Q2 this year, above the 134,000 workers hired in the 3 months ending May. The ILO unemployment rate also came in steady at 4.7% as expected. All this signals a significant recovery from earlier indicators showing firms are reluctant to increase their workforce due to the increase in employers' contributions to social security schemes to 15%. Also, job openings in the UK fell by 5.8% to 718,000 between May to July across nearly all industries. Again, evidence that some firms may not be recruiting new workers or replacing people who have left. However, the slowdown was not as sharp as some economists had anticipated. Still in the UK, the average earnings data, that is a key measure of wage growth, showed signs of slightly moderating growth. This is a metric closely watched by the Bank of England that had just executed a cautious cut in interest rates, but is still worried about inflation. If you exclude bonuses, earnings rose at a steady rate of 5%. That's year on year as expected. Average earnings, including bonuses, grew at a slower pace of 4.6% compared to estimates of 4.7% and the prior reading of 5%. Following the release of the latest figures, traders still put a roughly 70% chance on another quarter point cut by the Monetary Policy Committee before the end of the year, down from more than 90% before last week's MPC vote. Perplexity AI has made a $34.5 billion unsolicited all-cash bid for Alphabet's Chrome browser yesterday, above its own valuation as the startup reaches for the browser's billions of users, pivotal to the AI search race. Alphabet under pressure to spin off some of its businesses due to anti-competition concerns of regulators may be more open to this bid. Perplexity made a similar bid for TikTok US in January, offering to merge with the popular short video app to resolve US concerns about TikTok's Chinese ownership. Elon Musk is threatening to sue Apple for uncompetitive conduct. His artificial intelligence company XAI is alleging that the App Store refused to feature both X and Musk's AI chatbot Grok in its prominently promoted list of apps, making it impossible for any AI company besides OpenAI to reach number one in the App Store, which is an unequivocal antitrust violation, according to Elon Musk. Apple did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Musk's claims. In the Biden regulatory era, anti-competition practices were much more on the radar of regulators than today's much more relaxed stance. iScience players will push monopolist levers as far as they can. Apple and XAI tensions will be settled by adjustments unlikely to involve regulators, even as we see more players taking legal actions against themselves to protect their market positioning. Also, global tech giants players are struggling to please both the US and China at the same time, which is beginning to look like eating your cake and having it as the competition between both countries heat up. All this as China hints that it does not want inferior NVIDIA H20 chips. The NVIDIA chip may have become a negotiating chip as Trump delays tariffs that were due to hit exports from China by another 90 days to allow for trade negotiations between the countries to continue. America's effective tariff rate on China at over 50% is still high, and China is reported to be taking significant steps towards addressing American concerns. Trump also suggested he was open to working with Lip Bhutan, the boss of Intel, after asking him to resign a day ago. Intel stock jumped more than 3% in pre-market trading yesterday after Lip Bhutan met with the president. SMG Capital, an American investment firm, bought Fabergé, the well-known jeweler famous for its ornate eggs dating back to Imperial Russia, for about $50 million. The Fabergé brand had been relaunched several times since the 19th century, most recently in 2009. And Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva discussed the role of BRICS in defending multilateralism with Xi Jinping. That was recently his Chinese counterpart. And last week, Brazil vowed to tackle Mr. Trump's tariffs together with other members of the group of emerging economies, and also discussed business opportunities. The Central Bank of Kenya cut its policy rate to 9.5% from 9.75% previously, the seventh cut in a row. The central bank lowered its benchmark lending rate, saying there was room to ease monetary policy further as inflation remains well within target. The French mining group Eramet has appointed an executive to oversee mineral processing in Gabon, as Gabon seeks an end of exports of unrefined manganese to boost local processing. Gabon's government announced at the end of May that it would ban the export of raw manganese from January 2029, joining other West African states in seeking to capture more value from their mining resources. Nigeria's forex reserves were higher from 37.195 billion in July 1, 2025 to $40.159 billion on August the 7th, according to the latest CBN data. The FX reserve data shows improvements from $32 billion when President Tinubu took over. That was on the 29th of May 2023, and the improvements could be yet another sign that his reforms are working. South Africa's unemployment rate rose for the second quarter in a row, highlighting one of the biggest challenges faced by the country's year-old coalition government. The official unemployment rate stood at 33.2% in April to June, up from 32.9% in January to March, also one of the highest rates in the world. Top statistics official Risenga Maluleke said it was too early to tell whether U.S. tariffs were having an effect on the jobs data, as the number of unemployed people increased to 8.367 million in Q2. The most jobs were lost in community and social services, agriculture, and finance. South Africa is expected to have submitted a revised offer for a trade deal to Washington yesterday in an effort to lower the 30% tariff rate the U.S. imposed on exports to the United States last week. The government of Africa's biggest economy has tried for months to negotiate a deal but failed to reach agreement before the deadline. Annual Germany inflation rate remained unchanged at 2% in July, while month-on-month CPI came in at 0.3%, both readings as expected. South Korean cryptocurrency mogul Do Kwon, age 33, founder of Terraform Labs, a crypto firm whose token Terra USD collapsed in 2022, pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud and agreed to forfeit over $19 million. Do Kwon said he misrepresented the pricing algorithm meant to keep Terra USD stable. Kwon entered the plea in Manhattan Federal Court, hoping for a lighter sentence from the agreement signed by Kwon and prosecutors. Sentencing is set for December 11. OpenAI and co-founder Sam Altman are backing a company that will compete with Elon Musk's Neuralink by connecting human brains with computers, further heightening the rivalry in the new technology space. The new venture, called Merge Labs, is raising new funds at a $850 million valuation, with much of the new capital expected to come from OpenAI's ventures team. Europe's weapons factories are expanding rapidly as the data shows the long-promised defense revival, driven by an injection of public subsidies, is beginning to materialize. All this as the White House tempers expectations for a quick Russia-Ukraine ceasefire deal coming out of the Putin-Trump Friday Alaska meeting, calling it a listening exercise for the president. All this as Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, said Russian forces have advanced in recent days on his country's eastern front line. Asia-Pacific markets closed higher, and Japan's Nikkei hits fresh highs, tracking gains on Wall Street after the latest U.S. inflation data raised the odds that the Federal Reserve could cut interest rates next month. Well, that's all we have time for on this edition of Global Business Insight. Thanks for watching. This is Bode Ososami. Bye-bye.